Bambiz Marketing presents Elder Law Growth, the podcast that helps elder law and estate planning attorneys attract clients without wasting time or money. I'm your host, Amy Hurst. Let's dive in.
Well, she's going to prove it in her podcast. She's going to prove it in all of her stories. She's going to prove all these success stories. She's going to prove that she knows all of the avenues to go to. She has all of the resources that these people need, and they're going to get to learn what it's like to work with her, how long maybe some of these steps are. So it can really dispel a lot of myths or miscommunication, misunderstandings, misbeliefs about, practice and what you're specifically practicing. People are going to learn like, oh, so if I want to start this process, I should probably start this now because I want this to be resolved in the next 6 months. Or I want this to, I wasn't thinking that this is going to need to be taken care of, but if it's going to take me 2 years, maybe you need to start, interviewing lawyers and who do I really want to be working with?
That was Tiffany Mason. She is the founder of Virtually You, a podcasting company, and being the podcast expert that she is, we asked her to come on and train our elder law and estate planning clients in how to launch their very own podcast in 2023. That's right, a podcasting 101 series for elder law and estate planning attorneys, because get this, guys, according to Google and Apple, as of right now, as of today, there are only just a little bit over 20 estate planning podcasts available to listen to. There's only 20. You know what this means? This makes you a big fish in a small pond. People want to learn from you. They want to learn everything you know. They want to be able to trust you first before they call you. And YouTube isn't the only way to get that done. Podcasting is free. It's a great way to have fun. It's uncensored, so you don't have to worry about Facebook and YouTube crashing down on being too political. You can share your mind. It's fun. You can have guests. You can literally, the sky's the limit with podcasting. And through podcasting, guys, not only will you be targeting and reaching your future clients that you want, your dream clients, but you'll be reaching their adult children who are listening to podcasts in the car on the way to work, while they're taking care of their chores, their dishes. You're going to be reaching a whole other generation too, who can't really sit and watch a video, but they can listen. In this podcast episode, Tiffany is going to share with us a story of how powerful small and solo law firms can really benefit from having their own podcast. And make sure you're taking notes, because near the end, Tiffany is going to start hashing out ideas of what your podcast could be called. Hint, please don't call your podcast after your law firm. Nobody's going to want to click on that, and it won't be easy to find. So she's going to give you some clickable ideas, and she's going to give you ideas of what topics to talk about. So after this episode, you're going to be armed and ready to launch your podcast for your law firm in 2023. Let's dive in.
A podcast can also give that know, like, and trust factor that we're all seeking. So let's say that I'm the lawyer and it's my podcast, and every time someone comes on, they're like, wow, Tiffany really is a very experienced lawyer. She really knows the law. And I think maybe I'm going to reach out to her and see if we could do a discovery appointment and see if I have a case, or see if I would, have any legs to stand on in this situation. So it's a great opportunity to, again, know, like, and trust. We buy from people that we like, build the relationship with them, and then they end up coming to you for their next legal case. Or maybe they're just referring you to a friend. Maybe a friend is going through something and they are like, wait a minute, I heard this on a podcast. This guy does this. Let me refer you over to them. I had this contractor come to me, and she's been doing contracting basically her whole life. And she was just at a networking event with me. And somehow the group said, oh, you should start a podcast, and we'll call her Amy for sake of conversation. And so I met with Amy, and Amy was like, okay, I love the idea of a podcast, but I don't really know what I have to talk about. So I said, okay, well, tell me a little bit more about your business. And so she was saying how she can do small jobs. She could do big jobs. She can go everything from finding dirt to soil testing to make sure people can build on it, to coming up with the floor plan. She doesn't have any cookie cutter layouts. They're all whatever the person comes up with, whatever they say they want, whatever they think would be fun to have in their property. So she goes over all of that. And I said, okay, this is what I think. I think that you explore different equipment that you would use for these jobs, so that maybe somebody could do some of these small jobs for themselves at home. But you also bring up larger jobs, go over types of clients that you like to work with, client success stories, just like I was saying for you guys, that she could talk about, okay, so walk me through when you met me, what did you think? Okay. And when we finally came up with the blueprint for the house, how did you feel about that? So it's really giving people an insight to how you work, how it is to work with you. They get to learn your personality. They get to learn your body language. Based on this interview with me and Amy right now, you guys are thinking, yeah, I think I'd like to work with her. Or you know what? She's just not my cup of tea. And that's okay. I'm not going to be everybody's cup of tea. And I'm totally fine with that. But it really gives you an insight to grow that relationship. And you never know who's watching you. Now, this is the same thing that Amy could be doing with now my pretend Amy, that Amy could be doing with her podcast, right? All these people are watching her, and she's always been a part of like a contract group. And now she's stepping out on her own. And so people may be thinking, this is crazy. I don't know why she's stepping out on her own. I don't know why she thinks that she can, be a solo contractor. Well, she's going to prove it in her podcast. She's going to prove it in all of her stories. She's going to prove all these success stories. She's going to prove that she knows all of the avenues to go to. She has all of the resources that these people need, and they're going to get to learn what it's like to work with her, how long maybe some of these steps are. So it can really dispel a lot of myths or miscommunication, misunderstandings, what am I trying to say, misbeliefs about, practice and what you're specifically practicing. People are going to learn like, oh, so if I want to start this process, I should probably start this now because I want this to be resolved in the next 6 months. Or I want this to, I wasn't thinking that this is going to need to be taken care of, but if it's going to take me 2 years, maybe you need to start, interviewing lawyers and who do I really want to be working with?
I keep thinking about my mom and about people in her generation who like to put on their headphones and go garden and listen to the podcast and listen and just listen while they're doing the dishes or the gardening.
Yeah.
And Tiffany brings up such a good point. There's so many misunderstandings about elder law and estate planning.
Misunderstanding.
There's so many people do not realize how long the probate process is. They have no idea. And they have no idea because you have to help clients all day. But if you can put that on a podcast and share a story of like, oh, well, I helped Jane and John, they had $1 million of an estate, but guess what? They had to go through probate and that $1 million went down to, I don't know, 300,000. But just to hear that on a podcast, because there's so many people who just want to listen instead of just to read. And if you can just share stories, because we all know stories is the best way to convey information. And if you can just do an episode on a story, I helped this family, they had this amount of money, but because they had to go through probate, it took 2 years. And it took that amount of money. And if only they did X, Y, Z, they would have saved X amount of money.
Well, and this sounds like a 2-part episode to me. So the first one is going through the case. And the second one is how to prevent it from happening to you.
Boom! Somebody who's listening to this episode right now, do this. Because there's very little elder law and estate planning attorneys on podcasts. Trust me, I've looked. And the few that are very dry or they haven't posted in a year. So guys,
and let me tell you this. Okay, maybe they listen to podcasts, maybe they don't, but their son or daughter may. And they go, oh my gosh, I bet my dad has not thought of this. And then they say, Mom, Dad, listen to this podcast episode. And then guess what? They go, well, my daughter told me to listen to this episode. It's so good. You should totally listen to it. So there's so much. You may think, okay, 55 plus is not listening, which they are, but you may not think that. And so that's fine. But their children are. the generation below them are, and they're relying on, they trust their kids. So if I went to my mom right now and I said, you got to listen to this episode, there's a cure to arthritis, my mom would be like, what? Okay, I'm listening. And if there really was a cure to arthritis, she would send it to all of her friends that struggle with it too.
Right.
So yeah. Mm-hmm. So just because you may think that age group doesn't listen to podcasts, there's a younger generation that is listening, that they trust, that will refer it to them. And yes, you're giving away a lot of information, but the reality is, again, not everybody's listening to your podcast. So you're not giving away that much free information. And just like if any of you guys were like, okay, I'm totally going to hire somebody like Tiffany to help me out with my podcast, I can give away all this information to you guys, and you still might want to hire me or another podcast editor. So it's the same thing. Give away all the information, give, because all it's going to do is prove your credibility, your success record, and people wanting to work with you. So there's nothing wrong with giving all that information away. It's going to come back to you.
Do you have a recommendation on how much to post? Like how often to post podcasts? Like what's the rule of thumb, if there is one?
Oh, consistency. So there is not one. But what all of us will say, everybody in the podcast space, a consistency that you can keep consistent. Whatever you can consistently keep up with is the correct frequency of podcasts you should be posting.
Absolutely. Like case in point, there's so many there's really not that many law firms in the podcast pond right now, but
yeah,
a good majority that are on doing podcasts haven't posted it in a while. Like they've just kind of fizzled out. So
yeah, it's called a podcast fade. So it's usually either after 7 or about 50. Like when they finish one season, they're like, okay, that's it, folks. Or they just do 7 episodes. And then they're like, I don't know, I guess that was all my burning topics. I don't know. So then the podcasts fade out. And that's what I was saying. There's 4.2 million podcasts. They're out there. But the active ones, there's only 468,000 active ones.
Wow.
So that's a lot of opportunity. It's a lot of people that need your advice, that need you to be on the podcast. And I'm telling you what, if you guys are going to include stories, send your podcast to me. I want to listen to it.
Yeah. Because
if you're going to go over cases, I would just find it so interesting. Even if it's a case that doesn't apply to me, I would still want to hear it. Like whenever that real estate lady would talk about any of her cases that she had, I would just find it so interesting. Like, oh, they didn't get the house in the end. What? So it's just so interesting. And then the intricacies, why they didn't end up getting the house. So
that's such a good way to hook them in the beginning. So I could just see for our clients, they could just say, and they lost $3 million. Here's how they lost $3 million.
Yes.
Then you do your intro and then you jump into the story. Yeah. Like I could just see it. People will eat it up.
With your podcast, you're going to come up with a podcast description. So let's say that they find your podcast and it's called, what I remember about that one case, which again, too wordy, and then you go to the podcast description. The description is going to say, this is a podcast we recommend for 55 plus. We're going to show you all the tips and tricks to not lose it all, after retirement or after whatever milestone. So that would be another great way to get that point across. So get most of it. I have one client that wanted to be so wordy on their podcast artwork. And I'm like, no, we can convey this in your podcast description. So when we put in that word hustle and 16 of them came up, you can read a short little synopsis about what each podcast is going to be about. And you can make your decision from there.
Yep. You don't want to overwhelm people with a bunch of words.
Yeah. Yeah. Keep it simple, draw them in colors and, poppy words and go from there.
To all the elder law and estate planning attorneys who are listening, somebody please take that title of, and this is how I didn't lose it all or something like that, because I would click on that. My mom would click on that because that's something that your clients are thinking about. Like, how do I save my IRA? Like, how do I make sure my rights are protected? Like, how do I make sure all my stuff is protected?
Yeah. So and you could do blah, blah, blah for dummies. That's another one that would be popular because of all the books, like Food Carts for Dummies or Building a House for Dummies. It could be the same thing, like estate planning for dummies. You could do the same thing in just a podcast, although that may be trademarked. So you might have to use a different word than dummies, but they'll get the idea.
That was a clip from Tiffany's training session that she did with our elder law and estate planning clients on how to start your podcast in 2023. If you'd like to hear the full hour on how to start your own law firm's podcast, you can learn more about joining our coaching group to get access to not only that session, but to all of the sessions and get all the good stuff. You can find out more at our website, bambiz.net, BAMBIZ.net. Thanks for listening to the Elder Law Growth Podcast, the place to be for all things marketing for elder law and estate planning law firms. If you liked this podcast, please leave us a review wherever you are listening to this podcast. If you'd like to outsource your marketing to our team, go to bambiz.net and book a free call with us today.